Have you been persuaded today? Stop and think. I feel certain that at some point in your day today, you were persuaded, and in turn, you probably persuaded someone else. Persuasion is a great part of our everyday life. We try to convince others of something, or vice versa. We are being convinced ourselves about something. Even young children use persuasion, reasoning with adults and parents that their wish should be fulfilled and weighing the benefits in their behalf. Persuasion seems to be a natural part of life. However, by understanding fundamentals of persuasion, we can become better persuaders and see value within. After all, even when we began learning to read, write, or even ride a bike, the fundamentals were necessary to achieving the goal successfully. Today, we will look at 3 ideals given as fundamentals of persuasion. First, we will look at Plato's thoughts on persuasion. Then we will skim Aristotle's rhetoric idea and his 3 artistic proofs. And finally, we will briefly touch the power of language. First, let us look to Plato. Plato believed that we don't see truth directly, more that it is inferred. He believed that truth becomes more obvious through speech with others. He was against rhetoric approaches, as he felt rhetoric was used to disguise the truth and flatter and just appease the audience. He believed that the ideal speaker is one that is more concerned about the interest of others and less concerned about the interest of himself. There is a lot of truth in this idea if you think about it. Suppose you were listening to a speaker who is trying to convince you to donate to a children's organization. You will lose interest very quickly if that speaker only speaks about himself, his interest, and reasons why this would benefit him. However, if the speaker turns this around and speaks of ways that this benefits the children in a way that's engaging with the audience and speaks of the audience interest, you would be much more likely to listen to the speaker all the way through without losing interest. A great way to do this is to ask questions that are directed to the audience in a way that is engaging to them and causes them to think. These questions are answered with a hypothesis and then are cross-examined. By using this approach, you should end with some resolution that will eventually lead to a change. Another important approach to understanding the dynamics of persuasion is Aristotle's artistic proofs, presented by Aristotle. Unlike Plato, he focused on rhetoric and believed that rhetoric can be based on 3 artistic proofs: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is basically the source's credibility. Ethos can be established easily through body language, vocal quality, word choice, and sincerity, just to name a few. Pathos appeals to the emotions. As humans, we all have emotions that can be triggered that helps us to connect to a situation. When a speaker triggers these emotions, they have connected with the audience, thus further gaining trust and attention. Logos is appeal to the rational side. Humans all have the ability to think logically and reason with other people and themselves as well. Essentially, there are 2 types of logical arguments. The first is inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is basically when a persuasive speaker would argue by example. It would be an example in which the audience could use a particular situation to see a bigger picture and thus gain a conclusion. In deductive reasoning, this is the reason in which comes from generalizations and allows one to see a certain answer. For example, if I were to say all birds can fly, I am a bird, it would be easy for you to see that if all birds fly and I am a bird, then I can fly too. The idea through Aristotle's approach is to include ethos, pathos, and logos in order to achieve a rhetorical approach that will be very beneficial in persuasion. Last but not least, we will look at a few different thoughts about the use of language. After all, a speaker must use language to communicate and persuade the audience. According to Suzanne Langer, symbols are important to communication. As humans, our ability to create, use, and understand symbols sets us apart from animals. Symbolism is the key that underlies all human knowledge and understanding. Symbols, according to Langer, are the instrument of thought. Many times we use symbolism without even realizing it. For example, when you read a poem or a novel, a lot of times we find a deeper meaning, often without thinking about it, rather than what is just merely seen by reading the words that are there. Another idea about language is proposed by Korzybski. He felt that we carry maps in our head that are representative of non-existent or unreal territories. It is these maps that create stereotypical thinking and affect how we use language. A good example of the way we use maps is to think of a time that maybe when you visited a restaurant that possibly a friend, a relative, or someone had told you about prior to you ever visiting this restaurant. Before you ever stepped a foot in that restaurant, you possibly had an idea of what the restaurant would be like, whether it was from the food, the service, or even the atmosphere. And you had this idea without ever actually being there based on someone else's maps, which gave you a sense of stereotypical thinking. The idea behind these maps is that we should create them often in persuasion and impose them in a positive way on our audience. In doing so, we allow the audience to see things in the way that we see them, and they are able to relate to us. Although these are not the only aspects to understanding language, these are just two of a few ways. Both are very important and give you an idea of the importance of language. There are many fundamental concepts and approaches that we did not go over, but we can still grasp some of the fundamentals through the truth Plato stresses in his view, as well as the idea that we should focus on others in persuasion rather than ourselves. We can also see through Aristotle's three artistic proofs, ethos, pathos, logos, and logos, that rhetoric can be quite effective in persuasive speaking. And finally, language, we've learned through Langer and Korzybski, is very important in persuasion. While this list is not exhaustive and merely only skims the surface of understanding persuasion, I do hope that it offers a small insight into the world of persuasion. Perhaps the next time you try to persuade your boss for a raise, you can think back to Aristotle's artistic proofs and be able to appeal to your boss's emotional side and logically reason with him that you do deserve the big bucks. Or maybe when your child tries to convince you that his bedtime should be just a little bit longer and you're almost persuaded, then maybe you can counteract that argument with the use of maps. Create a map so that your child can see why this bedtime would not be beneficial for both you and for him. Wherever persuasion takes you, remember, not all persuasion is bad. If you understand its power, you can have limitless opportunities. Thank you.